a huge monster appeared in front of the window. Lloyd was worried as hell, though you couldn't tell. Staring directly into the eye of the monster, he didn't understand how it could be the Dragon King. After all, in front of him was a completely different creature, namely a huge and f***ing cute lion. The kitten started waving its legs, which struck Lloyd to the core of his soul. Now the hero was completely sure that the creature in front of him was definitely not the Dragon King. At that time the guy's beast appeared and started talking to the creature. They seemed to find common ground, and began to smile at each other. Lloyd asked the pet why their new friend had come. It turns out the lion was speaking a foreign language and the pet didn't understand it. At that time Lloyd's attention turned to the lion, because he turned to them with his ass and began to shake his tail. Lloyd asked if the beast was a messenger of the Dragon King, but all he got in response was a playful look from the lion cub. Lloyd began to smile, and just a moment later they were flying at breakneck speed. Lloyd and Xavier didn't expect such speed from his new friend. It was clear from the lion's face that this was not the limit of his abilities. Lloyd gasped from the air currents and assumed that such speed would make him even uglier than usual. Suddenly the hero had an epiphany, and instantly glanced in Xavier's direction. But to his disappointment he was still as handsome as ever. Lloyd began to voice his displeasure to the servant, and the servant, as always, responded nonchalantly. So the seemingly strange team continued their journey. A little while later they finally arrived in the kingdom of Manjato. Lloyd realized that this was the place where the strongest creature of all, the Dragon King himself, was to be found. They continued on their way, but came across an unexpected place. It was a huge castle that was completely surrounded by an incredible amount of gold. Lloyd began to drool at the sight of such riches. The hero squinted and noticed a strange man sitting on a couch. They began to move towards him, and Lloyd was visibly nervous, because most likely the great Dragon King was in front of him. Lloyd didn't wait and said hello to the man, and the guy interrupted his sleep. Lloyd and Xavier looked up. The dragon was complaining about not being able to sleep properly. Lloyd's face changed. He could barely comprehend anything. The dragon continued to toss and turn, then looked at the boys with his gaze fixed on them. He seemed to have something to say, but he flopped down on the couch. Lloyd was angry as he could clearly see that the dragon had noticed him. How could the dragon ignore Lloyd and just go to sleep? Lloyd tried to restrain himself. After all, it was all about the money. The boy's teeth gritted while the dragon slept unconcernedly. Suddenly, the man opened his eye again and looked in the direction of the hero, who was waving a huge plant, which created a pleasant breeze. The dragon couldn't understand what was happening now. The dragon remembered that people used to come, but after ignoring him they left immediately. While Lloyd started waving the plant to flatter him, Lloyd was even sweating, so diligent was he in his work. The dragon seemed very pleased with this sincere behavior, but the only way he could repay it in return was to fall asleep in a very good mood. Lloyd stopped waving the plant, and began to smile wryly at the fact that the feathery phase of his plan had just succeeded. Xavier had warned the hero that the Dragon King had powers commensurate with the King of Hell. Xavier asked him what he was trying to do, and he explained that as soon as the king woke up he would give him water. Lloyd began to praise the dragon's methods, and said he would pay with his life to befriend such a creature. Xavier was as frustrated as ever with his abnormal master. In a place where there seemed to be no sound, Lloyd's voice began to come out, as he dressed up like a rich man and began role-playing with himself as rich man and slave. He started throwing gold around, shouting and then pretending to be hurt by the coins. He shouted that to be rich you had to suffer, and playing the slave he happily accepted the gold coins. Xavier was watching. He thought deeply. He thought they were in big trouble. As this show was starting to look very interesting, Lloyd continued to play furiously. Xavier didn't realize what was about to happen. Lloyd didn't wait long and said they needed to eat. After all, a rich man can't be hungry. At that time Xavier thought that this was a typical thought of a poor man. Lloyd said that this place was beautiful, for there was much good to be found under the floor. At that time, Podun seemed to have found something. It turned out to be Kim Kai. Lloyd, with tears in his eyes, began to eat the delicious dish. Xavier reported that the Dragon King wasn't even showing signs of life and asked how much longer they would be idle. Lloyd drooled and said it would be a lifetime. Xavier reminded them that they would definitely have to go back to their land, because they had work to do there. Lloyd said that he couldn't turn out to be a Dragon King. The Dragon King heard the phrase that perseverance will always be rewarded, and then he opened his eyes in horror. He couldn't understand. It had been a long time, but the man was still here. The dragon remembered the past where the girl came to him, but in a moment he became lazy and just told himself that he had married her and that was the end. The dragon couldn't stand it and called the girl, but the call was rejected. The dragon started to get visibly nervous. He imagined the situation as the girl scolded him for it. Dragon admired the dream girl. Dragon started to think about what he should do, but there was a huge problem. It was all lazy to do. Dragon heard the voice of the hero inquiring if something was weighing on the man. He saw Lloyd's horrible face in front of him. Then a beam of intense energy shot from his eyes as he thought it was the face of Satan himself. The beam flew behind Lloyd and there was a nuclear explosion at the point of impact. Lloyd felt like he'd just lost his life. Lloyd calmed down and said he was ready to help the Dragon King. The king was shocked by Lloyd's calm demeanor. The dragon was also shocked at how well Lloyd knew his nature. At the time, the hero himself was thinking that his actions could be called the hidden principle of sales. He thought that the most important thing is not the product itself, and not even the customer's opinion about the product, but how much the customer likes the seller. The dragon decided to share his worries with Lloyd. He asked if Lloyd had a girlfriend, but a moment later he answered the question himself, saying that with such a face Lloyd could only dream of having a girlfriend. This brought the hero to tears, and Lloyd said that although he was inexperienced in the matter of girls, he had grown up in a full family and could still help. Lloyd said that in any family quarrels he was always the one who resolved the conflict. The dragon decided to try and began his story, but Lloyd interrupted him and said that the king was too lazy to move his mouth and offered to answer yes or no to Lloyd's questions. It was at this point that Lloyd took second place in the heart of the Dragon King himself. At that point Lloyd started brainstorming. He made a huge amount of arguments and decided to ask the first question, namely that for some reason the Dragon Queen had to travel far away. Lloyd began to make his assumptions, and after a couple moments he assumed that she had asked to call her in the mornings, and was thinking about the dragon forgetting that. The Dragon King was dumbfounded at what he heard. He couldn't say a word for a long time. Lloyd kept guessing the facts of the story, and finally said that all these problems could be easily solved with a single stroke. The Dragon King was silent. He just stood up and asked what he should do. At that time, the Dragon King's servant was shocked at what he had just seen, because the dragon had just risen 15 degrees. At that time, Lloyd raised his finger up and said that the solution would be to move to his realm and lie there. That's when the queen's heart would thaw. At that time, on Lloyd's land, construction was underway as always, and the man ordered the others to work harder. The others seemed as happy to plow as ever, and they kept repeating the words Lloyd spoke. But the man realized that the endless construction was making him a little tired. The girl reported that because of the increased number of migrants, more apartments would have to be built. As the senior knight was dealing with other issues, one of the problems was that there was a water leak in the rice paddies. At this rate, the knight was faced with a huge number of problems. Later, he was informed that Vicon couldn't pay the water bill, and the knight decided to go there immediately. But already he was thinking about the fact that he wasn't feeling well. It was Byron. He was 57. He was the senior knight of the Frontiera Terrataria. In this place, he was doing all sorts of things. The nobleman was yelling for the knight to look at him and finally realized that he couldn't pay his water bill. He kept complaining, and the man no longer had a face on him. Under all the pressure, the man just reached into his pocket and pulled out a strange cube. And as soon as he broke off a piece of it, Lloyd's huge head appeared and yelled at the nobleman. He begged Lloyd to be taken away and said he would pay. The man could only wish Lloyd would come back, for now he felt terrible. Suddenly a man's voice sounded, saying that Mr. Lloyd had returned. The knight got excited and galloped off at top speed in that direction. He began to harass the lord. He spoke of how much he had been waiting for Lloyd. He begged to hear his first and half-seventh request. He begged to be dismissed as it was too difficult. At that time Lloyd said no and asked how much more money to add. The knight began to say that with such progress he would just die and he wouldn't need the money. Lloyd seemed to think about it. He thought deeply and then just started walking. Finally he said that from now on the annual salary of the knight will be 3 billion. The man started to shout that money was not the problem, but after moments he promised to do his best. At that time Lloyd noticed the people. They were incredibly excited to bring the hero. At that time the guy seemed to realize that this was the place where he could be truly happy. After a while the evening came. They agreed with the dragon that Lloyd would wake him up every morning to call his wife. The dragon asked if Lloyd could make up for not calling for a month. Lloyd said he couldn't, and Dragon was upset that the guy had cheated on him. Lloyd said that they should start from scratch and communicate a lot. That's when the Dragon Queen would return. The dragon seemed to think about it, and then smiled like a fool, then fell asleep instantly. Lloyd reminded the Dragon King of his membership, and then the dragon took out a marker with a trembling hand and drew a heart on Lloyd's neck, which turned out to be a bonus life. He said that Lloyd was now a member of the club and went to bed. The hero sighed, then called Xavier along with him. Lloyd was glad he was done. Xavier didn't understand. Lloyd told him that he was now the richest man on the continent. He said he had a good servant, even a knight of Grandmaster level, and behind him a free Dragon King and 2 lives. Lloyd said that as of this moment he was invincible. Xavier thanked Lloyd. He said that since Lloyd's arrival people finally had the opportunity to realize their dreams, because when they lived poor, they had only one dream, and that was to not starve to death. Lloyd looked at the servant. He asked what Xavier thought about the fake that had stolen his master's body. Xavier said that he was glad Lloyd had come to this world. Such words seemed to touch the hero, but a moment later they almost vomited. The counter of saved lives appeared, which began to please Lloyd, but suddenly the number began to fall, and then began to fall by a huge amount. This began to frighten the hero, because the number fell so much that reached the mark 0.